Welcome to another deep dive. This time, we're going to take a look at something that maybe we haven't really thought about too much since we were in school,
Yeah.
and that's grammar.
Interesting.
But don't worry, we're not going to be like diagramming sentences or anything like
Mhm.
that. We're going to be going a little bit deeper and looking at some of the core concepts of language itself.
I see.
And to help us with this, we're going to be checking out a YouTube video by a guy named Mahmoud Mokhtar. And he's currently studying for the Delta English teaching qualification. So he's
Wow.
making these videos to like help other teachers and students.
Oh, cool.
And he's basically like going back and reviewing all this stuff that he learned like 12 years ago.
Oh, wow.
So, we might have some like dusty memories from back then too, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's jump in and see what Mahmoud has to teach us about, all this stuff.
That sounds great.
So one of the things that Mahmoud does is he starts off by, breaking down grammar into two key parts,
Right.
morphology and syntax. So, I guess maybe before we even get into like defining those, can you just give us like a really basic sense of like what those two concepts are? Like how do they play out in language?
Yeah, sure. So, um, morphology is basically all about the structure of words
Okay.
and the units of meaning within them, which are called morphemes.
Okay.
So you can think about prefixes, suffixes, and root words.
Right.
So like understanding this can actually like really help you expand your vocabulary because you start to recognize these units of meaning
Oh, that's interesting.
in unfamiliar words.
So it's almost like a code breaking tool for language then.
Yeah, exactly. Like you can kind of break down the words into their parts and then figure out what they mean.
I like that. Okay.
Yeah, so Mahmoud uses this example of the word unbreakable.
Okay.
And you've got un, which means not.
Right.
You've got the root word break.
Yeah.
And then you've got the suffix able, which means capable of.
Right.
So each of those is a morpheme.
Yeah.
It's the smallest unit of meaning in a word.
Okay, that makes sense. So those are kind of like the building blocks of words.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, and then so how about syntax? Where does that come in?
Right. So syntax is about how we arrange those words,
Yeah.
those units of meaning, to create sentences.
Okay,
So you can kind of think about it as the architecture of language,
gotcha.
the way that we put these building blocks together to express more complex thoughts.
So morphology is like the meaning of individual words, and then syntax governs how we put those words together
Yes,
to
exactly.
convey like a larger meaning.
Right. And Mahmoud makes this really interesting point that the line between those two isn't always super clear.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it can be kind of intertwined and tricky to figure out like which one is really at play.
Interesting. Okay, so we've got these like two sort of fundamental aspects of language, but they kind of blend into each other a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. Like sometimes it can be hard to tease them apart.
Okay, interesting.
So, even though those concepts can be kind of blended sometimes, like
Yeah.
you said, there are some really practical ways that we can actually apply this knowledge to become better communicators.
Okay, well, that's what I was going to ask. Like, so we've kind of gone through, what these concepts are, but like, why should we care?
Right.
Like, how does this actually benefit us in our daily lives?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it matters more than we might realize.
Okay.
Even if we're not like consciously thinking about morphemes and sentence structure all the time,
Right.
they're still constantly shaping how we understand and interpret language.
Okay.
So like, just like understanding how a car works can make you a better driver, right? Like understanding how language works can make you a more effective communicator.
Okay. I'm starting to see how this goes beyond just, grammar rules in school.
Right.
This is like actually useful stuff.
Yeah. So for example, like understanding prefixes and suffixes can help you figure out unfamiliar words,
Right.
which expands your vocabulary.
Okay.
And then on a deeper level, like being aware of how morphemes and syntax work together.
Can help you like analyze complex arguments
Wow.
or appreciate poetry on like a whole new level.
That's interesting. So
Yeah.
it's not just about being grammatically correct. It's about being like a more aware and intentional communicator.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. I like that.
And, going back to Mahmoud's video,
Yeah.
he has this really cool example
Okay.
from Arabic.
Uh-huh.
And he talks about how in some Arabic sentences, the word order doesn't actually change,
Okay.
but subtle changes in the word endings,
Okay.
which is what we know as morphology,
Right.
can totally change like who's the victim and who's the perpetrator of a crime.
Wow. That's wild.
Yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing.
So like in English, we tend to rely a lot on word order,
Right.
but in other languages, like morphology can be even more important.
Yeah, exactly. It
Yeah.
just shows how much like meaning can be packed into those little units.
Right.
Yeah. So even though English relies heavily on word order, like we were talking about before,
Right.
we can't underestimate the power of morphology in our own language either.
Okay.
So like think about the difference between like he walked quickly
Okay.
versus he walked with quickness.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting.
Right.
The first one is just like, a very simple statement of fact.
Right.
But the second one kind of emphasizes the manner of walking.
Yeah.
Like it draws attention to it.
Exactly. And so you can see how even these like subtle shifts in morphology
Right.
can have a
Yeah.
pretty big impact on the tone and the emphasis of a sentence.
That's really cool. This is making me realize just how much complexity there is,
Yeah.
like hidden beneath the surface of language. Like
Right.
it's a whole world of meaning that we often just kind of like take for granted.
It really is. Yeah. And the more we delve into it,
Hmm.
the more we appreciate how powerful and flexible human communication is.
I like that. So Mahmoud also mentioned that, different languages rely on morphology and syntax at different degrees.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious about that. Like, does that mean that some languages are like more complex than others?
That's a really common misconception, actually.
Right.
Every language has its own unique set of rules and complexities.
Okay.
And just because, like, one language might rely more on morphology
Right.
doesn't necessarily make it more complex than a language that relies more on syntax.
Okay.
They're just different ways of approaching the same goal,
Gotcha.
which is communication.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it's kind of like comparing different types of architecture, right?
Right.
Like
Yeah.
a skyscraper and a cathedral might look totally different
Right.
and use like very different building methods,
Right.
but they both serve a purpose and they both have their own kind of beauty.
I like that analogy.
Yeah, and so like just as we can appreciate different architectural styles, we can appreciate the diversity
Right.
and the ingenuity of different languages.
That's cool. I'm starting to see grammar in a whole new light.
Yeah.
It's like instead of being a set of like rigid rules, it's more like a dynamic toolkit. Yeah.
For shaping meaning and expressing ourselves.
Exactly. And the more we understand the tools in that toolkit,
Right.
the more effectively we can use language to connect with people,
Yeah.
share our ideas, and navigate the world around us.
So where do we go from here? Like we've explored, these building blocks of language,
Right.
but how can we apply this knowledge
Yeah.
to actually become more effective communicators?
Yeah.
Do you have any like practical tips for our listeners?
So many great questions. Yeah. Um, so one of the, I guess, the simplest but most effective things you can do is just pay attention
Okay.
to the language that you're encountering every day,
Okay.
right? So don't just passively absorb words and sentences, like
Yeah.
actively think about how they're put together
Okay.
and like what effect they're having on you.
So it's about becoming more mindful of language, I guess, both as a listener and as a speaker.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, for example, if you're reading a book,
Right.
take a moment to like really savor the author's word choice.
Like, why did they choose that specific verb
Right.
or adjective? How does it contribute to the overall tone and the meaning?
It's like you're slowing down to appreciate the brush strokes in a painting.
Yeah.
You're noticing the details that create the bigger picture.
Exactly. Yeah. And when you're writing,
You're right.
you can be more deliberate with your choice of words
Right.
and sentence structures.
Okay.
Like, think about the impact that you want to create
Uh-huh.
and choose your language accordingly.
So it's like moving from unconscious competence to conscious competence with language.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And another tip I would offer is to expand your linguistic horizons.
Oh, that's interesting. Like, how do we do that?
So explore other languages, even if you don't become fluent in them.
Okay.
Like learning about other languages can give you a fresh perspective on your own.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you'll start to see that there are so many different ways to structure a sentence,
Okay.
express an idea, convey emotion.
So it challenges our assumptions about like what's normal or correct in language.
Exactly. And it can make you more aware of like the subtle nuances of your own language
Okay.
that you might have taken for granted.
I never thought about it that way. It's like traveling to a new country.
Yeah.
And realizing that like your way of life isn't the only way.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And speaking of travel,
Yeah.
another fun way to apply this knowledge is to like pay attention to signs and menus
Okay.
and like other written materials when you're in a foreign country.
Right.
Yeah, even if you don't understand the language,
Uh-huh.
you can still appreciate the patterns and the structures.
Yeah. It can turn a simple walk down the street into like a linguistic adventure.
Exactly.
That's pretty cool. Well, this has been a really fascinating deep dive.
Yeah, it has.
We've learned that grammar is so much more than just a set of rules.
Right.
It's really the key to understanding the power and the beauty of language itself.
Absolutely. And it unlocks a world of possibilities for clearer communication,
Right.
deeper understanding, and richer expression.
So, to all of our listeners out there, I encourage you to embrace the fascinating world of grammar.
Yeah,
Don't be intimidated by it. Explore it, play with it, and see how it can enrich your life.
I agree.
Who knows? You might even discover a passion for linguistics that you never knew you had.
Absolutely. And if you're ever feeling lost in a sea of words,
Okay.
just remember those two guiding stars,
Okay.
morphology and syntax. They'll always point you in the right direction.
I love that. That's a great way to put it. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this linguistic journey.
Of course.
And we'll see you next time for another deep dive into the world of knowledge.